the idea of Celestia is, well, what if we can have big blocks? What if we can scale the blockchain to 100 megabyte or even 1 gigabyte blocks, but at the same time, not compromise on the decentralization and security of the network? And that's where kind of Celestia fits in.
This episode of Encrypted is sponsored by CoinRoutes. CoinRoutes is a leading institutional crypto trading platform that has rapidly established itself as a market leader in systematic trading solutions, offering a powerful algorithmic order execution management system that empowers the world's largest crypto trading firms. Welcome to the Encrypted Podcast, your gateway to the future of technology and innovation, right here in the heart of Dubai's dynamic tech universe. I'm your host, Maria Vovchok, and together with Dubai Blockchain Center, we are embarking on a journey that unravels the minds of tech visionaries through the digital frontiers that are shaping our world. Hello and welcome everyone to the Encrypted Podcast. I'm your host Maria Vovchok, and we're really happy to have here today with us Mustafa Al-Bassam, who's the CEO and co-founder of Celestia Labs. Prior to that, Mustafa also co-founded Chainspace, which is a company working on smart contract platform, eventually acquired by Facebook in 2019. He started programming when he was only 9 years old, and he did his first hack while using an online calculator for his math homework. Mustafa earned a Doctor of Philosophy in Computer Science from the University College London. His doctoral research focused on securely scaling blockchain-based layers, funded by Alan Turing Institute, and the thesis passed without corrections. Prior to this, he obtained a bachelor's degree in computer science from King's College London, graduating with first-class honors in 2016. Mustafa also co-authored an article with Vitaly Buterin. We're going to talk about that. In 2016, he was also recognized by Forbes as one of the 30 under 30 entrepreneurs in the technology sector. Mustafa, welcome to Encrypted. How are you today?
Thank you. It's great to be here. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much. There are so many interesting things from your career, and I think we can discuss it for hours, but what else do you believe our audience should know about you that maybe I haven't mentioned yet?
God, what should they know about me?
Something exclusive. Let's start from this. Nobody knows about you, but I believe that they should know about you.
My favorite animal is a mammoth.
Amazing. Even though they do not exist anymore.
Well, there's a company that's planning to do research to bring them back to life, so they could exist again in the future.
I heard about that because they already brought some of the white wolves that that do not exist anymore. So do you think that the mammoth will be back?
Well, I don't see. I mean, it's theoretically possible, right?
Yeah.
You just have to clone the DNA. So I think so.
Can you in this case compare as if it's a metaphor for the great promise of Web3? That in your case with Celestia Labs, you want to bring what was the great promise of Web3 and to bring it into real life.
Yeah, so we use the mammoth at Celestia as a kind of mascot to represent the idea of going bigger. And because the general idea is that the promise of Web3 over the past 15 years hasn't necessarily materialized in the way that people would have expected it to. Like, there's a lot of applications that people would have thought would be possible on Web3. Things like using cryptocurrency as a mainstream payment mechanism, for example, which was the original point of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Things like that. So the idea with what we're trying to do with Celestia is trying to make those kinds of original applications much more easy to deploy and to create for developers. And so that's kind of what we mean by going bigger, because part of the reason why those applications weren't possible in the past was because number one, scalability was limited, and number two, developers were very limited in terms of the development options they had. They didn't really have full customizability and control over how they could create applications. So at Celestia, we're kind of tackling that. We recently announced a 128 megabyte block testnet, and that can do. It's not just about having Visa scale, but it's about can you have can anyone have their own Visa scale network? And so that's kind of like what we mean by going bigger.
So in this case, I would like to focus on this, about this debate, because one of the things why Bitcoin obviously did not become the great promise of Bitcoin becoming the payment system that everybody is using to pay for coffee is also because of the block size. From your perspective, so you would be on the, let's say, you would be supporting, in this case, Bitcoin.com in this debate, right? Not let's say the so-called Bitcoin maxis.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a time when, I think around 2015, 2016, there were a lot of merchants that were starting to accept Bitcoin. I remember even at some point, if I remember correctly, Microsoft started accepting Bitcoin for like Xbox payments, for example. But then there was a point when the transaction fees became so expensive that we actually went backwards in terms of adoption. Those merchants that originally accepted Bitcoin, they stopped accepting Bitcoin because the transaction fees were so high, and no one was paying with Bitcoin because it didn't make sense. So that's when we had this Bitcoin scalability war, with one camp saying we should have bigger blocks, and the other camp saying let's not have big blocks because that ruins the decentralization of the network. So Celestia is kind of partly inspired by that.
So we'll definitely come back and discuss more technical, let's say, capabilities of Celestia, but also I would like to come back to some of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning, because I was amazed when I heard that when you were 9 years old, so you did your first hack when you were just using online calculator for your math homework at the time. I'm just curious, how did it happen and why did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, this was back in the day when the internet used to be a lot less secure, because like back then the programming languages and kind of coding libraries that people would use to create websites had a lot less built-in security features. So many websites were vulnerable to the same vulnerabilities over and over again. To use this calculator as an example, this was like a online calculator, but the way that was implemented was such that you could also type in computer code into the calculator, and it would be executed on the server that the calculator was running on. So they weren't actually validating the inputs to that calculator, and that's a very common way for hacks to happen. So like back then, a very large chunk of the internet was vulnerable to these kinds of vulnerabilities, where the user could kind of like input something to some text box and take control over a server in that way. Nowadays, it's kind of like there's a lot more better built-in security measures. So nowadays that's less likely to happen. But this was back in like 2000s and 2010s.
I'm just curious, at that time, this early experience in your life, did it influence your path that you decided to go into computer science and cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in kind of computers from an early age. So to me, that was always a kind of like a natural, thing for me to do, basically. But specifically in terms of why I was interested in decentralized technologies and blockchains, was because when at a young age I was using software like BitTorrent and peer-to-peer file sharing systems, and that kind of inspired me because it kind of made me realize that you can use the internet in a decentralized way to share information with people without using a centralized middleman to go through. So even if there was like some information or some file or some software or video that someone else did not want you to share, they couldn't stop you because it was a decentralized peer-to-peer file sharing system. And there was a website called the Pirate Bay that was a good example of that, because the Pirate Bay, it was like a website where you can download like copyrighted like movies or software for free. And a lot of like big corporations were trying to take that website down, but they couldn't because it was using a decentralized system called BitTorrent to allow people to share files. And so that kind of made me realize the power of decentralized technologies, and made me think about, well, can we apply decentralized technologies in other kind of applications other than just peer-to-peer or decentralized file sharing?
Is it true that when you were 16, You hacked FBI affiliates and even Fox News. How did it happen? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so as I said, like back in the day, there was around that time, there were a lot of very basic vulnerabilities.
But we're talking about FBI affiliates, not
Yeah.
something, you know.
Yeah, but still, a lot of these systems had very basic vulnerabilities, and no one like really bothered to expose those vulnerabilities, because like even if you emailed them say, hey, you have a vulnerability, they probably wouldn't pay attention to it. So you basically needed someone that was brave enough to actually exploit those vulnerabilities and hack into all those kind of organizations to show actually all those vulnerabilities exist, but no one is paying attention. It was kind of you just needed, and I was 15 at the time, so
15, not even 16.
16, yeah, something like that. And yeah, you just needed someone to kind of like point out that the emperor had no clothes.
So what was the outcome of this situation? Did the FBI reach out to you? What happened then?
Well, this was in a group with 5 other people. So I think most of us were kind of arrested. And I was under 18. I had a relatively lenient sentence.
Okay, so it was like a serious, in this case, hack, as you can say. But after that, you actually went to academia. And as I mentioned earlier, with the PhD that you got on blockchain scaling, you mentioned, and this is what you explained, why exactly you decided to start Celestia as the first step. But before that, if I'm not mistaken, you also wrote an article with Vitalik Buterin because you were thinking to scale on top of Ethereum. Is that correct?
Yeah, so because I had an interest in decentralized systems and I was following the Bitcoin kind of scaling debate very closely, I was very interested to do more research on that and to kind of see, can we scale blockchains without compromising on security and decentralization. So I started a PhD at UCL in 2016, focusing on this topic. And part of that is what the Chainspace, which Chainspace was the first sharded blockchain protocol, and that was later kind of spun out into a company that was acquired by Facebook. That later became part of the Libra team at Facebook, because Facebook were building their own blockchain, and then they later closed that down. And now that research and technology is part of Sui and Aptos. But I was kind of more interested in I was very interested in Ethereum scaling roadmap. So like back around those days, the main talk was about this idea of Ethereum 2.0, and the idea was it was a very complicated scaling roadmap. Like it was like this six phase scaling roadmap that was centered on scaling Ethereum by using this technique called sharding. And it was so complicated that like the idea was, let's add 1,024 shards to Ethereum. And there was a lot of like interest. There was a lot of like difficult research topics to make that possible. And one of those topics were like, how can you make the shards secure? Because a shard is like a blockchain, so you're basically splitting up the blockchain into multiple blockchains. But one of the questions that were bugging me was that, well, what if one blockchain was malicious? How can you prevent it from like infecting bad state into the other blockchains? So that's where
This is where, for example, you started this. You encountered you were doing research on sharding, and this has led you to believe that modular approach is the one that you should favor in this case. You should be in favor.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So, like the main difference between a modular approach and the sharded approach is that a modular approach is very similar to the sharded approach, but instead of having a fixed number of shards in a system, you're basically saying that anyone can create their own shard on top, or in effect, anyone can create their own chain on top of the layer 1 network. So you basically have like a modular system of layer 1s and layer 2s, where the layer 1 is only responsible for security, and consensus, and layer 2 is where all the actual computation and transactions happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of modular because it means that you can now create your own layer 2 blockchain on top of a layer 1 blockchain and inherit the security from layer 1 blockchain.
I also liked when you said that monolithic chains are like all-in-one mainframes, while Celestia is more like a cloud. So can you please unpack this analogy?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I see the evolution of Web 2 is very similar to how I see the evolution of Web 3.
Mm-hmm.
So if you imagine like back in the early days of the World Wide Web, if you wanted to deploy your own website, like back in the very early days, the only way you could do that is generally if you had access to some physical server. Like usually you would have like a server in your university, or you might buy your own physical server and put it in your office, and then that's how you would serve your website. But obviously that's a lot of overhead to have to maintain physical hardware or physical servers to just be online, or to have your own for your business to be online. So then that's when they invented this idea of shared web hosting providers. So instead of having to maintain your own server, you could use someone else's server. You just sign up for a service. Back in the very early days, like there was GeoCities was an example, but you had things like Bluehost or DreamHost where you would just sign up, then you would upload your website code, and then you would share the same server as everyone else. But that was very limited. And because first of all, it was limited in terms of scalability, because you have to share the same server as everyone else, but also very limited in terms of flexibility, because you were limited to whatever programming languages were available on that server. So back then you only had like PHP. But then the cloud came about, and the cloud kind of gives you the best of both worlds, because what the cloud basically enables you to do is have this idea of a virtual server, where you can go on Amazon AWS or DigitalOcean, and within 1 minute you could fill out a form and deploy a virtual server that basically behaved as it was your own physical server, but without the limitations of having to maintain that server, because you effectively can now you have full control and full scalability of your infrastructure, and you can install whatever you wanted on the operating system. So I see the evolution of Web3 as very similar. If you think about what were the first blockchains, you had Bitcoin, and back then, before smart contracts existed, if you wanted to deploy a decentralized application, you had to create your own blockchain. So that's why we had Bitcoin, but we also had things like Namecoin, which was like a blockchain for DNS, and you had Litecoin, Dogecoin. All of these were their own blockchains. So then that's why Ethereum kind of revolutionized that by saying, instead of everyone having their own blockchain, why don't you just like have a blockchain and have a general smart contract environment on there, or make the blockchain very programmable, so everyone can share the same blockchain. And then that's very similar to shared web hosting, because you just write your application in Solidity, you upload it to Ethereum, and everyone's application runs on the same environment. But that has very similar limitations, because it's limited in terms of scalability, and it's also limited in terms of flexibility. There's a lot of applications that are difficult to implement in the Ethereum virtual machine. So that's why now in the kind of like modular architecture, we have this idea of layer 2s and rollups, and layer 2s are basically virtual blockchains, similar to virtual servers on AWS. With rollups and layer 2s, you can now deploy your own blockchain within 2 minutes, and without having to worry about maintaining your own consensus layer or consensus network, or worry about the security of your network. But then now you have your own environment where you can experiment, and you can have full customizability and control over what applications are on your chain and how your chain is structured. And that makes kind of a lot of applications that people wanted to do but were difficult to do now possible. The same way that the cloud kind of enabled a lot of new web applications.
right now quite a lot of blockchains, they're trying to build a basic abstraction layer to interact with others. Can you please explain how in this case Celestia, with your modular approach, how is it different, let's say, and where does it fit like while interacting with other blockchains?
Yeah, I mean, so abstraction layer is a slightly different part of the technology stack. Like you can have an abstraction layer that uses that interacts with blockchains on Celestia. So Celestia is basically a layer 1 network that makes it very scalable for people to deploy their own layer 2 blockchains on top of. And you could have an account abstraction system where the end goal should be like if you have assets across multiple layer 2s, it should feel like a single chain. And that's also something that we're working towards. We have an initiative called Lazy Bridging, where Lazy Bridging.
Lazy?
Bridging.
Bridging?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the idea is like, because one of the limitations of a modular architecture or layer 2s is that users don't want the friction of having to bridge their assets between all these different layer 2s. Like there's already like hundreds of layer 2s, and in the future there could be way more. So, and the end goal is like, how can we make the bridging experience so light and so easy to use that it feels like using one chain, and that's where technologies like account abstraction, but also technologies like chain abstraction, where you can have wallets now that show all your assets, but across different chains, and it shows a aggregated balance. So even if you have like USDC on 10 different rollups, you can still see it as one asset.
Yeah, that's true. This is happening, by the way, which is really convenient, I believe, with a lot of stable coins, let's say, when they are on different chains. They can be in one wallet that operating, like, for instance, with Trust Wallet. We had Awen Chen on our podcast before, and she explained us how, in this case, the wallet, integrated multiple blockchains into one, and you can definitely have stable coins on different chains. I would like to focus right now on the concept that was mentioned as well by you, which is data availability sampling. Could you please explain us this concept and how does it help? Why is it so significant while enhancing blockchain security and scalability?
Yeah, so I mean, going back to the Bitcoin block size wars, there's this inherent trade-off between increasing the throughput of a chain and how decentralized that chain is. Because the idea is like, if you increase the block size, if you increase how big the blocks are in the chain, then it makes it more expensive for regular users or businesses to run nodes to verify that the chain is operating correctly. And so that means those businesses and users would have to more and more rely on trusted third parties to interact with the chain and to tell them what the state of the chain is. And so that's why these Bitcoin maxis, as you say, they didn't want to increase the block size for Bitcoin. But data availability sampling is a technology that helps to somewhat alleviate that trade-off, because it allows you to increase the block size, but it allows end users and blockchain nodes to have a very high probability guarantee that the entire chain was constructed correctly by the validators, but without those users needing to download every single transaction. Instead, what they can do is they can download random pieces of every block. They can download like a random piece of every block and verify that. And if you do that, it turns out that you can have a very high probability, almost 100% guarantee, that just by downloading very small pieces of each block, that the entire chain is valid and correct.
Got it. Let's focus right now on zero-knowledge proof integrations, because can you please tell us how is Celestia incorporated zero-knowledge proofs to maintain state minimalism while enabling complex functionalities?
Yeah, so you can say that Celestia is kind of very philosophically similar to Bitcoin in the sense that Celestia is very minimal. Like compared to Ethereum, like Celestia does not have any built-in smart contract platform or environment.
But what about right now smart contract built on top on Bitcoin blockchain?
Yeah, so But they're built as layer twos, right, using
Yes.
BitVM, and that's where ZK comes in.
Yeah.
So the idea for Celestia is very similar to Bitcoin in the sense that can we extend the functionality of the layer one without having a full-fledged smart contract platform. So like Bitcoin has a scripting language, but it's very minimal compared to the Ethereum virtual machine. It's not as state intensive, for the chain, and it's not as computationally heavy. For Celestia, we want to take that even further, because we don't even have a scripting language. So for Celestia, we're planning to add a native ZK bridge to Celestia to allow ZK rollups or ZK layer 2s to basically extend the functionality of Celestia. And that's very similar to kind of what Bitcoin is doing, because there's a lot of talk about Bitcoin adding ZK opcodes to the Bitcoin state machine so that you can have Bitcoin, you can have ZK rollups on ZK L2s on top of Bitcoin. So Celestia built from scratch, assuming that in the first place. And I think there's a lot of advantages to that architecture, where you don't have a built-in smart contract environment. If you look at the Ethereum, for example, there's a lot of complex issues that have arisen from the fact that there's a built-in smart contract environment. So first of all, there's this issue of state growth, and it's basically a problem where it becomes more and more expensive to run a node, because you have to store more and more information in the RAM, and that kind of inherently limits the scalability of the chain. But secondly, you also have issues like MEV, where because you have on-chain exchanges on Ethereum, there's an overwhelming incentive to centralize block production. So now, block production on Ethereum is relatively centralized because there's an incentive to do that, so that you can capture MEV and kind of capture arbitrage between swaps and exchanges. Bitcoin doesn't have that problem because Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts. So in Celestia, we're kind of trying to bring the best of both worlds. So can we combine the minimalism of Bitcoin with the extensibility of Ethereum effectively?
Encrypted is your exclusive ticket to the epicenter of technological innovations in the MENA region. Let's focus right now on a lot of partnerships. Let's focus on ecosystem integration, because you're collaborating with such platforms as Arbitrum and the Cosmos ecosystem, and you're trying in this case to enhance interoperability and liquidity. Can you please tell us what is right now the result of this kind of partnership and collaboration, and how does it help really to enhance liquidity?
Yeah. So as I said, because Celestia does not have the execution environment itself, we rely on kind of third-party frameworks to provide an execution environment on top of Celestia. So if you wanted to build a application on top of Celestia today, you would typically choose some framework. Like you could choose Arbitrum Nitro or the OP stack using Optimism or ZK Sync, or Starkware's rollup stack. So there's a lot of different rollup and layer 2 stacks to choose from if you wanted to build something on top of Celestia. And that's where we kind of have a lot of partnerships with kind of companies that to integrate Celestia into those rollup frameworks to make it possible, because we have a lot of projects that want to deploy like an Ethereum L2 using something like Arbitrum or OP stack. But the problem that they have is that if they just use Ethereum for DA, they have a very limited scalability and throughput, because Ethereum has very limited transaction throughput and very limited data availability throughput. So that's why we work with Arbitrum, for example, to integrate Celestia as an option for their framework, so that you could deploy an Ethereum L2 or an Arbitrum L2, but you can plug in Celestia underneath to significantly extend and improve the scalability and performance of your application.
What can you say right now are the biggest challenges for Raptor community, and where do you see Celestia fit while helping with those challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is kind of for the Web3 community is to they go beyond speculative use cases. Like if you look at the kind of most popular use cases of Web3 over the past year, a lot of it has been kind of these speculative use cases which are fun, like meme coins and NFTs, and those are fun. But I think people have always hoped for for blockchain to have much more mainstream adoption than that, and much more non-speculative use cases. And I think a kind of a very promising avenue for that is real world assets and putting real world assets on chain. Because if you think about what is actually the killer application of crypto so far, it's basically been stablecoins. Like stablecoins have been pretty much the most successful non-speculative use case for crypto so far. I think now crypto stablecoins do more transaction volume than Visa and MasterCard combined. So clearly it's working, but I think that can go further with instead of just putting stablecoins or fiat on chain. Now there's a lot of projects that are working to put other kinds of real world assets on chain, like tokenized funds or tokenized stocks, because I think the thing that crypto has been really successful at is large scale retail distribution. Like it's way easier for an average person to sign up to Binance or some centralized exchange than to go sign up for some stock brokerage account and buy stocks. So there's some very promising projects that plan to bring real world assets on chain, and so we have a partnership with we have a partnership with a chain called Converge, which is Converge. Yeah, and it's a real world asset chain on Celestia, and it's a partnership between Athena and Securitize. So Athena has this yield bearing stablecoin, and Securitize has a kind of platform to tokenize funds and maybe in the future stocks. And it's a very good example of application that can only be done on Celestia, because if you're trying to create a real world asset platform where you can put tokenized funds and tokenized stocks on chain, then you don't want to do that on some shared smart contract environment like the Ethereum Layer 1 or Solana for several reasons. First of all, for many of these real assets, you don't want it to be just tradable by anyone. You might want it to be in some kind of permissioned environment where only approved people can trade those assets. And by approved, it could be like you have to pass KYC or email checks before you can have a wallet on this chain. So Converge, for example, they plan to have a permissioned part of the chain and non-permissioned part of the chain, and it could be the case that some assets can only be traded on the permissioned part of the chain.
What else among the exciting projects or builders that you can say they're building on top of, they're launching on top of Celestia, that you believe that people should definitely pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean Converge is one of them, as I mentioned, the real world asset chain. I think there's a few others that are cool.
Which ones that you can name right now?
Yeah, there's a project called Pay. Payy. It's like a very user-friendly payment application. So you can basically send someone a link, and that link is basically a payment in itself if they claim that link. So it's kind of like Venmo but way easier, and I think they could potentially have a real shot at cracking on-chain payments, which is like the use case that everyone wanted, that expected for crypto to take off on, but hasn't yet. And it's also privacy preserving, so the payments use ZK cryptography to make sure that they're private payments as well.
So you can, in this case, not see how much money does the person have on his or her own account in this case. This is one of the additional things, because you mentioned really valid point regarding RWAs on chain getting tokenized. And the thing is why, for example, some of the owners of these real assets, they are afraid that because everything is visible on the blockchain. So they are concerned that these assets will be visible to everyone, to everyone on the blockchain. So do you believe that in this case, ZK proof can help with this issue?
Yeah, I mean, ZK proofs can also help with that issue, but we've been working with some customers that have very similar requirements, because they want to have like some kind of on-chain exchange or on-chain applications, but because they might be working with institutions, they don't necessarily want every transaction to be public. And it's not, for them, it's not about necessarily privacy, it's more about confidentiality. So for them, we're kind of developing a solution that allows them to encrypt their transactions on Celestia, and only be decrypted by certain parties.
So in this case, when can we expect this solution to be released and be announced?
I think that's relatively within the next few months.
Next few months. Okay. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Right now, we move to our last part of our interview. Stay tuned with Encrypted. Rapid fire questions. Okay, Mustafa, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. If you had to explain blockchain to a kid in one sentence, how would you do that?
It's like a magic notebook that you can see and write in, but you can't erase or change it.
Which blockchain founder would you take on a road trip?
That's a hard question. I mean, I think Vitalik is probably like the founder with the most integrity, so probably him.
If you found out who Satoshi Nakamoto was, what would be your first question to him, her, or them?
Why did you not remove the block size limit before you leave? Yeah.
What would you never do while building a company?
That's the difficult one. Probably like hire too fast, or not be careful about who you hire.
The biggest misconception people have about Celestia?
That it's just a storage layer, when it's actually also consensus and security.
What was your biggest loss in doing business?
I wouldn't say I don't think I had any. It's hard to think. I don't think we've had any specific losses. Yeah.
Amazing. What's harder, explaining DeFi to a 5-year-old or teaching your parents how to use MetaMask?
I would probably say the first one. I mean, MetaMask is harder.
Okay. So you would rather explain DeFi?
Yeah.
What's your favorite programming language?
I mean, right now my go-to language is Golang.
Okay.
Yeah.
Imagine you are a character in the cypherpunk movie. What's the most Web3 thing you'd carry with you all the time?
A blockchain node. Yeah.
What piece of advice would you give to a 16-year-old yourself today? At the time when you hack Fox News?
Be more careful.
Finish the sentence. My business philosophy is?
Let me think. My business philosophy. My business philosophy is to think on a 10-year time horizon.
How often do you practice your keynote speech before going on a stage?
I never practice my keynote speech.
Oh, nice. Which Web3 buzzword makes you cringe the most today?
KOL.
The next big trend to follow?
RWAs.
What is your personal formula for success?
Same one as my business philosophy. Think on a long time horizon.
Amazing. And Dubai for you is associated with?
It's associated with heat.
Heat, okay. Today we had Mustafa Al-Bassam, co-founder and CEO at Celestia Labs. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time. From the gleaming skyscrapers of Dubai to the innovation hubs of the Middle East and beyond, Encrypted brings you thought-provoking discussions, exclusive insights, and stories of innovation that will leave you inspired. This episode of Encrypted is sponsored by CoinRoutes. CoinRoutes is a leading institutional crypto trading platform that has rapidly established itself as a market leader in systematic trading solutions, offering a powerful algorithmic order execution management system that empowers the world's largest crypto trading firms.